Ukraine's president makes a plea for more weapons as Russian forces move in on eastern Ukraine. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, and this is The Heat. Russia says it has taken control of the port of Mariupol in eastern Ukraine. It claims more than 1,000 Ukrainian Marines have surrendered. Ukraine's defense ministry says it has no information of that surrender. What we know for sure is the strategic port city has been at the center of some of the heaviest fighting for weeks. The mayor of Mariupol says some 21,000 civilians are dead, tens of thousands more unable to leave. On Wednesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres acknowledged there's no diplomatic solution in sight.
A global ceasefire at the present moment doesn't seem to be possible. But there are lots of things that can be done in order to guarantee evacuation of civilians from areas of fighting.
You referenced a global ceasefire. Do you mean a ceasefire in Ukraine is not possible?
At the present moment, a global ceasefire
in Ukraine
doesn't seem possible.
For more on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Kyiv is Oleksii Riabchyn. He's an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. From Maryland, Michael Hanlon is a senior fellow and director of research in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. With us from Washington, D.C., Anton Fedyashin is a Russian affairs analyst and professor of history at American University. And Pavel Felgenhauer is a defense analyst and columnist for Novaya Gazeta. He is joining us from Moscow, and that's where we'll begin the questioning. Pavel, the governor of Luhansk, now urging people to evacuate the area. He believes the Kremlin is ready for a major push there. On Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that the military operation is going to continue until the country's goals are fulfilled. Are those goals still the same as they were when this offensive began? How do you see things changing or shifting, or are they?
Well, the goals seem to be the same, and also President Vladimir Putin followed up and this issue and said that the talks with Ukraine are deadlocked, are not going anywhere. So that believe that, yes, there's a kind of overall consensus that though the diplomatic contacts between Moscow and Kyiv are continuing, right now it seems that they're not going anywhere. So that means the future is going to be decided primarily on the battlefield, and both sides are gearing up for a possible very serious confrontation in the coming weeks. Though, of course, right now, the time of year is not very good for any military action, especially maneuverable, swift military action. We're in the middle of the mud season, and there's also a lot of rain falling on the Great Russian Plain there. So that means troops are tied to roads, and their maneuverability is very limited in the number of roads there in the Donbass and in Kharkiv. And in the surrounding areas is very limited, and these roads are narrow and they're bad, and there's a lot of woods around, and so it's a bit of a problem logistically to kind of for the forces of both sides to get together, but they're doing their job and they're preparing. I believe the real action will begin maybe somewhere in May. The summer campaign is coming.
Anton, let me pick up on what Pavel said, Putin mentioning that these talks are at a dead end. Where are the talks? It seemed like there were some talks early on. From a diplomatic standpoint, where do you see things right now?
Well, unfortunately, Putin's right on this particular issue. The Russians are accusing the Ukrainians of pulling back from the provisional conditions, deep, discussion points that had been tabled at Istanbul. The Ukrainians are accusing the Russians of not following through on talks and relying on the military. In other words, moving ahead with the military campaign while trying to reach a diplomatic solution. And I have to tell you that I don't really see a diplomatic way out right now until either one side makes a very important concession and decision to continue with talks, or both of them are convinced by outsiders to continue talking. But unfortunately, I agree with Pavel. I think there's a massive campaign coming. We see all the signs of this. And so the geopolitical weaponization of mutual accusations of genocide, unfortunately, that we've seen flying back and forth over the past weeks are making any attempt to actually compromise increasingly difficult. This demonization of each other, both by the Ukrainians and the Russians and by outsiders, it's not going to help.
Michael, here in the United States, President Biden approving $800 million in new military assistance to Ukraine. It's going to include artillery and helicopters. Talk to us about this latest assistance package. What type of difference does this make in the fighting?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything my colleagues have said about what's probably looming, and also the way in which the next few months of weather could shape the various goals, which means that Ukraine has to gear up not only to continue to do very well what it's been doing already, and that's stopping Russian forces on major roads, but also preparing for a more systematic Russian onslaught that could come across miles of open field, of which we know there is a great deal in eastern Ukraine. And that's the way to answer your question, to think about what could be needed to stop that. Normally, if you're trying to think about a big military operation strewn across a wide swath like this, and you don't have the firepower or maneuver capability to match your enemy, you're going to need some kind of asymmetric advantage. The asymmetric advantages so far have included things like Javelin anti-tank weapons. But if the Russian positions become much more dispersed, I think we'll need to help the Ukrainians get more than just that. And so I'm thinking in terms of smart minefields, for example, that can be put in place only when need be and activated when need be and cover a large swath of land. Obviously, this is extremely regrettable to have to talk about deploying landmines, even smart ones that would turn off after a certain period. It's a tragedy. It means that those fields will be dangerous for many years to come. But unfortunately, if the alternative is a Russian conquest of eastern Ukraine, I'm not sure that there's much choice in the matter. So in the short term, I'm not sure this latest arms package really has to include a lot of that. But as we start to approach June, I think the Ukrainians need to have ways to stop a Russian advance across a wide swath of territory, and that's going to mean more than just artillery, more than just javelins. And
Oleksii, the latest package is on top of $1.7 billion in assistance from the United States. It also comes after a phone call between Zelensky and Biden. Zelensky, of course, has been on this offensive, talking to anybody who will listen, saying, look, we need weapons. Is that working out for him?
Yes, indeed. This is working strategy, and our president is doing quite well of foreign diplomacy. He's every single day communicating with different parliaments all over the world, speaking with different leaders, and a huge amount of them are coming to Ukraine. Today we have 4 presidents of Baltic country and Poland, and this is definitely helpful. Unfortunately, the aid is coming too late. We need more and more weapons to confront the Russian aggression, the Russian war. And the brave hero in Mariupol, in the city where I have born, basically I was born in this maternity house that has been shelled, and the brave heroes of Mariupol given us time, and this genocide, which has already been mentioned, this slaughter in Bucha, which basically opened eyes for world leaders for the massacres that Russian troops are doing. This is not just conquering the east of Ukraine. It's basically they are trying to eliminate the Ukrainian state. This gives more confidence in the world leader to support Ukraine, and our guys at the front are ready to push back Russian soldiers to their motherland.
You mentioned your own ties to Mariupol. Russia's defense ministry releasing images of what they say are more than 1,000 Ukrainian troops surrendering in that city. We should say that there's no independent confirmation of this claim. How's the Ukrainian government responding to that? And what are you hearing from your friends or family in that port city?
There is no connection to my friends. Fortunately, my family and my grandparents, they were evacuated, but I cannot contact to any of my friends because their phones are still off. And as for the surrendering, yes, this is war. We see numerous footage of Russian soldiers being surrendered encircled and interrogated. The same is with the Ukrainian soldiers. This is war that happened. I wouldn't claim about the 1,000 that was been, claimed by Russian propaganda machine, but like several of our Marines definitely were surrendered. But the bulk of them, the Azov regime battalion and several battalions of Marines has been united and still fighting back Mariupol, which give us, as I told, like a lot of time for rebuild our position, to regroup our forces and to defend Donbass.
Pavel, Oleksii brought up Bucha, and Putin has said that his troops committed no atrocities in places like Bucha, where the bodies of more than 400 civilians have been found. An international criminal court is investigating possible war crimes there. The New York Times out with a story today, I was just reading it online, saying when the Russian army left Bucha, it left bodies of dead civilians strewn on the streets and basements, backyards, some with their hands tied behind their backs, shot in the head. President Biden, as you know, saying that the actions by Russia, he's describing it as genocide. Do you believe Moscow is going to take any responsibility for what happened in Bucha? I mean, how is the Kremlin going to respond to this?
Well, the present response is total denial. That this is all a provocation by the Ukrainians and the Americans and NATO and other bad foreigners. I believe that this was and is a PR total disaster for the Russian position in this conflict. And the response, well, it was maybe predictable, but again, maybe not the smartest one, but that's what it is. Of course, this, I would believe, what happened in Bucha is basically a rather isolated incident. And maybe there were some rogue actors there, and it would be better for Russia to actually participate in the investigation. Though, of course, Moscow is not a party to the International Criminal Court. But right now it is as it is, and that's how it's going to be. Of course, not in all Ukrainian cities any bad things happen, say in the south, where the Russian troops in the first days of the campaign took over a number of large Ukrainian cities, like some without any fighting, some with little fighting, like Kherson, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and Gninchansk, and there were no kind of real bad behavior there. And right now, the commander of the South Military District, Alexander Dvornikov, has become the overall coordinator of the operation. I believe it would be much better for the Russian troops to keep their discipline. There's no real good reason or need to misbehave.
Anton, we are in the 7th week of this war. Russia, of course, has committed thousands of troops to Ukraine. It's facing these heavy sanctions from Western nations. But Vladimir Putin, as we have said, is pretty much digging in his heels. He commented on the matter. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We don't intend to be isolated. It is impossible to severely isolate anyone in the modern world, especially such a vast country as Russia. That's why we are going to continue to work with those of our partners who want to cooperate.
Is he right on that score? And how long can this country continue this conflict economically with these sanctions?
Mike, first of all, the isolation is one-sided in the sense that it's the West that has isolated Russia with a few, the Euro-Atlantic, the NATO community, first and foremost, with a few allies in the Pacific, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. The rest of the global South has not joined the sanctions, despite, by the way, enormous attempts, enormous pressure by the United States and repeated attempts. So that's number one. This is a lifeline for the Russians. Number two, what's really funding the Russian economy and this war are sales of oil and gas. And despite the multiple statements that we've heard both from Washington and from multiple European capitals, cutting off oil purchases, and especially gas purchases, is simply unfeasible right now. I'm all for a green economy and for the great transition, but as those of us who remember or have read about the 1970s and the energy crisis back then, these transitions take A, a lot of time, and B, are sometimes reversed for all sorts of reasons. So the oil and gas money is going to continue to pour in. Now, are the sanctions creating problems for the Russian economy? Definitely. At the same time, has the ruble fared surprisingly better than most people expected? Also true, but it's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, but it's done remarkably well so far. My last point is the question of the sanctions impact domestically. Look, we've seen a rally around the flag effect. This is a reaction to the indiscriminate sanctions that have been imposed on the Russian economy as a whole, and therefore also on its people. So far, they've produced the opposite effect. Will things change? Quite possibly. But if the Russian population is ready to go into a war economy mode, which it's experienced, by the way, numerous times, literally within the past 110 years, then the Russians can sustain this war effort at great economic cost to themselves, but they will be able to sustain it without completely shutting down to the world. But the technological development will definitely suffer, because the most important thing that the West has cut the Russians off from is, of course, access to chips, access to high-end technology, and access to banking.
Oleksii, just getting a sense from Anton about the level of support in Russia, I have to ask about the situation there in Ukraine. I mean, this story coming out of Mariupol, the mayor there saying 21,000 civilians killed in the besieged city. Obviously, it's a strategically important port city for both sides. Give me a sense of what the attitude is there in Ukraine. How are people taking the war? Obviously, the pounding has to take its impact in a mental health standpoint. I mean, where do you see things?
Of course, it's really hard when your country is in war in 20th century. Why on earth we are in war is not clear for us. But never ever in Ukrainian history people were not so united. So we are united as a nation. So we consider it as a fight for our independence from the empire that is trying to pull us back. And this is we see the spirit of Ukrainians is rising up, and we see the all over support of Ukraine. People went to the street all over the world supporting Ukraine, doing a lot of performances, and this inspire our soldiers. But if I may to reply to a comment from Pavel on a southern captured territory, there are a lot of reports of misbehavior of Russian soldiers and Russian occupation. Massively people, and civilian, mayor, journalists, activists, has been captured. Massively, they are disappeared, and we don't know where they are. There are a lot of equipment, agricultural equipment has been just stolen and transferred to Crimea. We read reports about women being raped, that they're replying over the telephone. So I would not agree with him that this misbehavior that was shown in Bucha is not repeated in Kherson, in Melitopol, and in many other southern cities. There is no free press there. There is no foreign media. There is no foreign observers. There is nobody. So we don't know what is happening there. The world don't know. So there are massive reports of misbehavior there.
We don't know is an important feature of this war. There's so much going on, and we don't know all of the details happening on the ground. But what we do know, Michael, is that Zelensky, as I mentioned earlier, has been on this offensive. The latest round, he spoke to the Parliament of Estonia, where he urged Europe to take more action. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Europeans must make every effort to restore international law immediately, to immediately force Russia to seek peace. This task can only be done jointly by everyone in Europe, at the level of the whole European Union, together with other members of our anti-war coalition. If Europe wastes time, Russia will use it to expand the war zone to other countries. I believe that together we will never allow this.
Michael, what do you make of his comments?
Well, I think, first of all, President Zelensky's been masterful at not spinning this war, but speaking honestly and forthrightly and courageously in a way that the world has rallied behind. And even though my colleague mentioned a moment ago that it's true, much of the global South hasn't united in applying sanctions against Russia. Most of the global South did unite in kicking Russia out of the Human Rights Council, among other kinds of statements that may be sort of easy, but still reflect a strong consensus that Russia is the aggressor in this invasion. And I don't think that Putin has fooled anybody. Even his supposed friends know what's going on. So I think President Zelensky continues to make these kinds of pitches for help, for assistance. He obviously wants more than he's received so far. If I were in his shoes, I would ask for the same things. I would ask for no-fly zones. I would ask for instant NATO membership. I would ask for all sorts of assistance. But he's still getting a lot more than many of us would have predicted, and certainly, I believe, than Russia expected. And his troops and his forces are showing remarkable capacity, not only courage, but actual ability to field the weapons and use good tactics. So I think this is just part and parcel. Today's speech, part and parcel of an ongoing public relations campaign that, again, is so sincere and so legitimate that it can't help but succeed in most of its various dimensions.
And Oleksii, you brought up the point that the presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, all NATO members, there on the ground as a show of support. Earlier this week, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also in Kyiv. What are these visits accomplishing, though, more than just a show of solidarity? I mean, are they really accomplishing much of anything?
You know, when we saw the video when Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, walking Kyiv with President Zelensky, like speaking with occasional random people, of course, like surrounded by bodyguards, but like you see on a contra now when Putin sitting somewhere in his bunker or meeting the like Belarusian leader or like whatever, sitting like in a long table, it brings like human perspective to this. So it's definitely inspiring the Ukrainian people to see the word support. But it's not only about, you know, support or gesture. It's about the leadership. So we see the leaders of the world coming to Kyiv, bringing more support, bringing more financial aid, bringing more weapon, and we feel that we are backed up by the whole world. Although, like as is previously mentioned, not every single nation put a sanction or like condemned Russia behavior, but like we see the unanimity in supporting Ukrainian people in this war, and this inspires us a lot to fight till the end, till the victory.
Anton, these could be seen as gestures, but there are actual actions as well. Finland and Sweden now talking about joining NATO, possibly. What kind of message is that going to send to Moscow?
Listen, this is to be expected. If Moscow didn't think that this was going to happen, this would have been wishful thinking and awful planning. But Mike, look, I don't think that Sweden and Finland are the real issue here. The Russians may mind that, but I doubt they're going to move against them. The real issue is Ukraine, and that's the country that's not being given NATO membership, although it was being integrated into the Western security sphere of influence. And I think that when the dust settles and we read about this conflict 10, 20 years down the road, I think one of the big questions that IR theorists and historians will be asking is how could the West have made such a misjudgment of both pulling Ukraine into its sphere of influence and yet not giving it any of the guarantees that Article 5 of NATO offers. We can ask the same question about the EU. I know we're talking about the war here today, but listen, there's another track that's very important here. President Zelensky just received the famous file with the questionnaire from Ursula von der Leyen, who was in Kiev. The Ukrainians they really want to be in the EU. I would say that that's much more important for Ukraine than being a member of NATO in the long run. But how long this process is going to take is an open question. We spoke about the Russian economy and the devastation that it's experiencing, but that pales in comparison to what Ukraine is experiencing now, especially keeping in mind that it went to the war as the poorest country in Europe. And whether its path to the EU is going to take 20, 30 years like Turkey's is still taking. Well, look, this is an open question, but that's really going to be the thing to watch as the conflict will come to an end, which, of course, inevitably it does, and I hope sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Michael, let me ask you about this, because Russia is Finland's third biggest trading partner, right after Sweden and Germany. Polling in recent years had shown that most Finns, they didn't want to join NATO. Most recent poll, though, a majority of Finns say they do want to join NATO. There's a saying, when Russians look across the border, they see Finns. If Finland joins NATO, they would see enemies. Obviously, they're not going to like this, but I was at an event last week, a number of Nordic nations represented, and this woman from Finland was like, look, we used to be able to go look to the east and the west. We had good relations both ways. Now we're just going to look to the west. What is going to be the residual impact on Russia long term, do you think?
Well, I don't blame the Finns for reassessing, because while they've tried to make almost a principle of neutrality in their history, they've been attacked by the Soviets before in 1939. And to the extent they feel that Vladimir Putin resembles Joseph Stalin, I couldn't blame them in the least for wanting to join the Western Alliance. But you're right, it's regrettable. It's one more manifestation of this war that has terrible consequences. I mean, as much as I feel bad for Finland, I feel much worse for coming back to the developing world in the global south, where food prices are going up astronomically because so much of the harvest in Ukraine as well as Russia is going to be impeded from reaching the global market in the coming weeks and months. Winter wheat, crops like that. And so Finland's just one example. There are all sorts of ripple effects of this crisis, and they go well beyond Europe. So yes, I agree with you 100%.
Oleksii, give us a sense of what it's like in Kyiv and surrounding areas right now. Have things changed much in recent weeks? What's it like now?
Yeah, like Kyiv, like months ago, and currently it's a completely different city because like people are returning. We have queues in Kyiv, and like, thanks God, like I'm happy to be in queue. In Kyiv, like cafes are opening. And people are returning, but of course, like when you see pictures of Mariupol, when you see pictures of Kharkiv, when you see the destroyed suburbs of Kyiv, like Bucha, Borodyanka, when you see Chernigiv, a very old and beautiful city, being shelled, and you cannot, like, life cannot be the same. And of course, like when you see the devastating impact of like economy not only of Ukraine but the whole world. With this war, you know, like a lot of people are crying basically, and like you're not, like, life will never be the same, unfortunately, because of the Russian aggression. Like people do not understand like why Russians attack Ukraine. Like it's not about NATO, it's not about joining EU, it's just about, you know, the genocide that they're doing. They are not thinking that Ukraine should be the independent country, and it will be a generation. We will never regret about this.
We've got about 20 seconds left. You know, we're also looking at the hardships in rebuilding. More than $80 billion in infrastructure damage so far. Obviously, that's going to go higher. What are your hopes as we close out this show?
Yeah, we are talking about the Marshall Plan, so plan of recovery of Ukraine, and we'll see. I'm also a big green fan, and we will see that we will rebuild our city with the most energy efficient technology. We will rebuild our metallurgical plants with the innovative hydrogen technology, and Ukraine will be a leader in the Eastern Europe, and we will be a member of European Union, and I will be the member of the European Parliament from Ukraine, and this is our hopes.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank all of you for joining us. It's been a great discussion, and that's going to do it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.